My inspiration to delve into community arts began because I was running away from working mainstream film. I studied visual arts and drama and literature at Flinders Uni, and that gave me a really eclectic background to the arts and a range of skills and ways of seeing that have stood me in really good stead. From uni I went straight to work at State Theatre on the Oedipus trilogy in 1976, and I then worked in a succession of mainstream companies, including the Australian Ballet, Sydney Theatre Company, J.C. Williamson's and Beckett Film Corporation. I worked in those companies in a number of capacities, in design, in props making, scenic art, costume construction and finishing, millinery, etc. These areas really did enable me to develop a wide skills base. At uni I took a night course in architectural drafting so that I could be able to draft set plans, and throughout that period I was sought by alternative theatre companies as a designer because I could work for nothing. I was able to draft the plans as well as construct and art finish the work that I was designing. It was a satisfying time because most of the alternative companies were making work about contemporary issues that affected people at a community level. If I do forget to change my slides, do let me know. The insane hours and the dearth of creativity involved in most branches of filmmaking was really not sustainable for me. And at that time, my partner, who is still my partner, Catherine Murphy, alerted me to the growing community arts movement. This was a hugely interesting area for me. It potentially embraced a number of art forms. It was political, topical, and gave the ordinary person a creative voice. In short, it had the meaning and creative potential that I had been lacking in mainstream work. This was in the time of the dinosaur. There was no internet, no Facebook, no Twitter, no Instagram. There was only people with a landline, perhaps an office desk, maybe a fax, snail mail, and if you were lucky you had a car. And I guess this made face-to-face contact inevitable, and it necessitated the coming together of in person to do anything, which was then essential to community development. I started in my local community, which was then Henley Grange, and I researched the demographic. I made connections and I looked at the physical attributes of the built environment. We started in that area with a sea-wall mural called Up Against It. I've got that image, that's all right, we'll go on. This drew in local schools and unemployed artists, a musician and a contemporary documentary filmmaker. It also involved the local council and other community agencies in the project. So this is me actually showing my skills applying the render to the wall that we were. This wall was over 30 metres long, but we did get a concrete spray out soon after it was slightly staining. The next major project included the ageing population in the first phase, and then brought older people together of all ages in a festival of fun and games. Those are our unpaid mural artists. Kids working on the mural. And this is our festival of fun and games. We collected stories of simple games that were played in the early 20th century and then crafted the games with older participants. We had making sessions in nursing homes, in people's sheds, homes and in community centres. At one stage we realised that we were working with a huge number of people, but they didn't have any understanding of their part in such a big project because their age and their mobility isolated them. So we organised a sing-along in the town hall and organised transport for everyone. The sing-along was a hoot, and it served to show the scope of the project to all our individuals and smaller groups. Somehow after that, I just immersed myself in community arts practice and started to develop projects for government departments and non-government organisations. I still did design plays for alternative companies that dealt with issues like eating disorders, ageing, gay rights, workers' rights, Aboriginal rights and identity. A highlight and a turning point in my work was the design of a play called Cinderella by Eva Johnson, which she wrote for Black Women in Focus as a protest in 1988. This play was the first Aboriginal play or musical to be staged in a main stage venue in space in the festival centre. That experience revealed to me that I had no real understanding of the troubled internal politics facing Aboriginal people. I didn't grasp the importance of traditional custodianship, and I only learned that I was ignorant of just about everything. I did a couple more shows with Eva before I knew that there were many diverse ways in which white people were engaging with Aboriginal artists to bring their culture to the fore and to ultimately be managed by them. This was happening in traditional lands, in regional and urban communities. In 1991, I received an inaugural Australian Council Fellowship to travel and study cross-cultural relationships that were being developed in a range of Aboriginal community settings. This trip, 4 months on the road in a tent, it was a major eye-opener for me and took me, by chance, I needed urgent dentistry, to Ceduna with Catherine, my partner. This was at the end of the 4 months, and we'd been travelling right throughout South Australia and the Northern Territory. We were in Ceduna. In Ceduna, we looked for a place to stay out of town. We were met by a returned Vietnam vet who had a shack on his land. We drove there by a heavily fortified bottle shop for a 6-pack of Coldies. It was really hot. A drunk Aboriginal pedestrian accosted our farmer for parking in his way. We talked about this with the farmer, who after hearing what we did said we should do a project in Ceduna, which was then only one of 2 towns in Australia to vote against citizenship for Aboriginal people in the 67 referendum. Later, after we got project development funding from the Australian Council and Arts SA, we were meeting with locals over a 3-month period, and we were told then by a very grumpy white guy that Ceduna should have a big white curtain thrown up around it and declared an intensive care zone. Lots of services should go in until they were healed. This was just an amazing metaphor for a place in which division along racial grounds was so endemic, even though to him at that stage we were effing white nigger on the seas. I concentrate on this story because it was difficult, but it was a model process that was supported as such by funders, and I'm going to sort of talk about this project in a bit of detail now. We had funding to develop the project over time with the people that it would affect. You couldn't have just walked into that community and hoped to pull one off. You had to build relationships and trust among the Aboriginal and the non-Aboriginal communities. We refined the project with the communities over that 3-month period that had meaning and also explored the possibility of starting a reconciliation project. Reconciliation was a word not often used in the early 90s. In that 3-month period, we infiltrated that community. We spoke to every group, white and Aboriginal, and we just were dogged people. We, were told to F off and by a whole bunch of people. We just kept going back. And in the end, we made banners. We set ourselves up on a trestle in the main street outside the town hall with silks, and we just asked people to put their hand on there and trace it and sign it for reconciliation. And in the end, we had 4 big banners that were held, carried in the Oyster Fest parade that year. Throughout the project, there were issues. How our government came to power and started to dismantle the CDEP. Mass protests for rallies were held in Canberra, and our friends had to go, and they told us that reconciliation was over before it had begun. We just sat down with them and painted banners for them to take, and this was a trust clincher for us. It meant that we weren't in the doghouse and we could continue the project. Initially, we had an idea to subvert a souvenir, a word meaning memory or memento. At this time, the foreign loans debt and severe droughts saw farmers forced off lands that had been in their families for generations. They were prone to family breakdowns, substance abuse, violence and suicide. We couldn't help but see that the connection to their land was exactly akin to the Aboriginal people who had been displaced to create their farms, their family farms. But the idea of making souvenirs relating to loss was too close to the bone of the displaced family community, So we looked at what balance meant to both communities and came up with a sculptural metaphor of the seesaw. As we left town after that 3-month phase, on the last day, there was a riot at the footy club and a young Aboriginal guy was severely injured and flown out. A white man was jealous of this guy's attention to his girlfriend after a footy match. But rather than adding to the negativity around our project, this incident fueled a wonderful collaborative work around the footy culture and racial violence. This is a tilting football oval. Sorry it's a bad image, but around the edge are a whole bunch of angry mouths shouting out terms of abuse, and the footy players are all punching each other out on the field. Teams of collaborating people from the community came together to explore law, culture, balance from diverse cultural and legal perspectives. Sculptures were made in a collaborative process. In that process, discussion had to take place and therefore understanding of cultural and social difference was fostered. Around 200 people from both communities attended the exhibition of the works. Coming together to this extent was really a first in the town. The exhibition attracted further Touring Australia funding to travel around the country, and a couple of pieces went to Canada for an international exhibition. We received funding to document the project and to get that into a book that outlined the process and the project. And this book accompanied the tour, and it was bulk purchased by schools and community groups and libraries. Catherine Murphy wrote the book, and she engaged an Aboriginal editor who advised that Aboriginal people wouldn't read the text, but they needed to access the story in image. So we engaged an Aboriginal artist to create illustrations to tell the story simply from an Aboriginal perspective, identifying what was meaningful for them in the process. These are some of the illustrations in the book. Being immersed in the community meant that we objectively saw ways in which social justice might be delivered to affect greater social balance, and so we offered ideas. We sent a guy to Port Augusta for radio training, Chucky, the guy. He returned and trained other locals, and the first ever Aboriginal programs were delivered on community radio stations. This was huge for the Aboriginal community. They did a request show, a politics show, a love song show, and more. In trying to get some local financial support, we approached the community hotel. This pub had the Rooster Bar where Aboriginals were segregated for drinking and pokies. A significant amount of money was made from the pokies in that bar, and it was all Aboriginal money via the CDP. We asked them for $500 towards materials, and we were knocked back. So we suggested to the Aboriginal community that they apply to install pokies in the Debonite Footy Club, and that profits from that could be ploughed back into their own community. A couple of years after we left, an Aboriginal Cultural Arts and Cultural Centre was set up and has produced some wonderful artists, and the centre is still operating today. This is a pretty good long-term outcome from the process that did have integrity. The project was well supported, and it was the evolutionary process that made it successful. I wonder if a project like this would be possible today. Who would the partners be, and for what business case benefit? We did have Country Arts SA really helped us with their arts officer, Alex Reid, who you would all now know has risen to great heights. And she was fantastic because she lived in that community as well. I've been encouraged and supported in a long career by great staff at funding bodies, people who share the philosophies underpinning CCD work. The policy and bureaucracy that has evolved around funding has, in my own opinion, diminished the possibility for personal contact and direct advice from funding staff in some cases. I think mainly the Australian Council I'll be referring to there. The work I've done in project development has delivered jobs for a range of wonderful community artists. It's a particular skill to work with integrity in the community, and this leads me to muse on the current funding model, partnerships, and how that has affected my work and CCD work in general. The current requirement is to attract significant money from non-art sectors to the arts. The only way to do this is to initiate conversations at a very senior level with the people who hold the purse strings and direct policy development. So you need to create projects to take to them that serve the policy and business delivery agenda. The outcomes need to be identified up front. Once you get partner funding committed, you move down the order to staff who haven't heard and don't understand what you want to do. They have had some of their budget directed to your project, and they can become pretty disillusioned that they aren't in control of their budget and their work. So you become a salesperson, excuse me, and a mediator to bring them on side. Then you move on to the staff who are delivering services on the ground. And if you are lucky, you get to the community. The thing I've noticed lately is how stroppy community members and on-the-ground staff can be if they feel like they're being drawn into someone else's agenda. They want to be respected and to be able to do their own thing that hasn't come down a line from a minister or a CEO. They want to identify their own issues and approaches to arts. They know creative people, artists in their own community and want to use them on projects. They can resent intrusion from outside. I guess this could be seen as a long-term positive empowerment outcome from years of CCD projects, but I don't think so. In the past, the work was built from the ground up, but now because of a highly competitive funding climate, if you start with community, you rev up community enthusiasm, get the ground staff on board through consultation and negotiation about how you can enter their programs for their benefit, work up the line to the money holders, and you can ultimately fail to secure funding. This is enormously frustrating and not a good look for the arts. Often this development work happens unpaid for artists. In the past there was always a chance that funding might not be forthcoming, but if you could indicate strong community ownership and good artistic program, delivered with integrity, you stood a great chance of success. And you had discussions with arts officers. Community ownership was the main criteria there. In the current partnership criteria, you have to have your program mapped out 3 years in advance. Personally, I can't think of any consecutive years in my life that have been predictable and stable. So in the latest development with Country Arts SA that I've been working on, we built, sorry my slides are all out. In the last 2 years of the project, we've had a chance, we've had a change, I'm just going to give you some little examples of change. The change to the structure in the state's health delivery, the change of 2 key ministers, change of federal government, a possible imminent change in state government, a change in the actual climate, change in key staff and management of our partners and within Country Arts SA, a change in the artists proposed, a change in the Australia Council staff, a change in governance structure of partner organisations, changes in community groups and organisations, the death of key community members, changes to the physical buildings that our partners occupy, and many more changes happening at micro and macro levels. This is the climate in which we try to prove that the arts can achieve real business outcomes for our partners. It is very hard. Companies of artists, have I got 5 minutes? Yes. Companies of artists have evolved that deliver CCD and are well supported by the Australian Council. Big Heart and other people speaking at this conference are an example. They do wonderful work, and it's an evolving trend in how CCD is delivered. These companies have resources to reside within communities to create work. The partners know they will get a quality outcome, excellence, because of the model way in which these companies work. They have diversified to include new media and hybrid art forms into their delivery, and they deliver around the nation. The birth of the internet, Facebook, SMS, Instagram, Twitter and other social media platforms exist around communities of interest, and this offers new ways to conceive and deliver projects. These virtual communities exist and are fertile ground for arts ideas. The digital world offers a range of new art forms and distribution possibilities for audio and visual content. For me, the biggest challenge of the future is getting people to understand the philosophy of the work we do and to have a selection of funding models that can deliver projects with an integrity of process. Regardless of the social platform, the work needs to be developed with and by the communities engaged. It needs to reflect their individual and collective exploration and expression. Projects need inbuilt flexibility. The ability to respond to real and changing issues is vital for its success. Reporting against KPIs and other business-based rationale might be a good indicator in a business sense, but life is messy, unpredictable, and takes turns that we could never anticipate. It's this very fertile boggy ground that works the best for CCD projects. I have ploughed this ground now for many years, and some of the principles never change, even in an ever-changing universe. As Nina Simone wrote, everything must change, no one and nothing remains the same, and this is the context that we need to work in and with. Thank you.